On my wedding day, the air outside the hotel smelled of flowers and river breeze, and for a moment I believed nothing could touch me. Guests were gathering, the photographer was ready, and my gown felt like it had been stitched out of light itself. Then I saw two uniformed officers walking straight toward me, my mother, right behind them, pointing at the car that was supposed to take me to the aisle. The smiles around me faded, cameras froze mid-click, and as the trunk opened I realized the next few minutes would decide whether I made it to my own wedding or anywhere at all. I woke up earlier that morning to the soft hum of the river outside my hotel window, sunlight sliding through the sheer curtains and pooling warm across the carpet. Charleston had that slow golden light that made everything look like a painting, and for a few quiet moments, I let myself believe the day would unfold exactly as I'd imagined. Paige was already in my room, crouched low with her camera capturing everything from the lace train draped over the couch to the pale pink bouquet resting in a glass vase. The glint of my grandmother's bracelet on my wrist caught her lens, and she teased me about looking too calm for a bride. Oliver was safe in her room down the hall, probably curled into the blanket I'd packed for him, waiting for me to come and scratch behind his ears. The knock came just once before my mother, Margaret, stepped in without waiting for an answer. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe in that slow, evaluative way I'd known my whole life. Vanessa followed, wearing a smile that was quick but never warm. She glanced at the gown and murmured something about how it was more dramatic than she would have picked and how Mark's family would certainly have something to say. I didn't take the bait. Years had taught me that defending myself only handed her more ammunition. Paige asked if they wanted to join a photo or two, but Margaret declined, insisting there was still plenty to do before the ceremony. Vanessa lingered just long enough to run her fingers along the edge of my veil before setting it down like it wasn't worth her time. Then they were gone, leaving behind a chill that seemed to settle over the room. By 11, the stylist had finished pinning my hair, and Paige helped me into the gown. The satin slid into place with a whisper, the weight of the skirt wrapping around me like a promise. I took one last look in the mirror and told myself I looked strong, ready. The lobby smelled faintly of gardenias and fresh coffee. Through the glass doors, the white town car gleamed under the late morning sun. Mark was already at the venue greeting guests, and I was moments from joining him. I stepped outside, lifting the skirt slightly to keep it from brushing the concrete, and that was when I saw them again, two uniformed officers standing near the car. In the distance, I caught the edge of my mother's voice, calm and clear, guiding them toward the vehicle. One of the officers, tall and lean with close-cropped hair, stepped forward and introduced himself as Officer Miller, saying they had received a tip about illegal substances in the car. His partner, broader and unsmiling, stayed close to the vehicle, scanning every movement. My pulse stumbled. I tried to speak, but my mouth was suddenly dry. Margaret gestured toward the trunk and the backseat, her tone almost hospitable. Officer Miller opened the passenger door while Officer Ruiz crouched beside the back seat, slipping his hand deep between the cushions. A small clear bag slid into view, sealed and filled with white pills. "That isn't mine," I heard myself say the words, feeling strange even as they left my mouth. Neither man reacted. Miller moved to the trunk, rifling through the neatly packed decorations, while Ruiz straightened, holding something between two gloved fingers, another bag pulled from the hidden fold under my skirt where the fabric had been tucked for travel. Gasps from nearby. Paige's camera hung slack at her side. A couple of hotel guests had stopped on the sidewalk, whispering to each other. My dress suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Margaret stood with her hands folded loosely, her expression calm, almost relieved. Vanessa was leaning against one of the columns near the entrance, arms crossed, eyes locked on me like she was watching a scene she had scripted. Mark's best man, who had come to escort me, froze a few steps away. He glanced from the officers to me, and then down to the pavement. Officer Miller told me to place my hands in front of me. I heard someone murmur that it must be a misunderstanding, but the sound was swallowed by the click of the cuffs. Cold metal bit into my wrists. The skirt bunched awkwardly as they guided me toward the patrol car. Somewhere behind me, a camera shutter snapped. Not Paige's this time. It occurred to me that I might be on someone's phone, maybe already being sent to half the guests at the venue. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the car door on the way the sunlight flared against the paint and tried to steady my breathing. The ride to the station was only a few minutes, but every second felt stretched thin, each turn of the wheels marking the distance between the life I thought I was stepping into and whatever this was becoming. They led me through a side door of the station into a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. My wrists were sore where the cuffs had been, and every sound seemed sharper than it should have been. A heavy metal door opened ahead, and I was guided inside a small holding room with pale cinderblock walls and a bench bolted to the floor. The door shut behind me with a solid click, the kind of sound that made it clear it would not open for me until someone else decided. I sat gathering the skirt of the dress around me, trying to keep it from touching the dusty floor. The train pooled at my feet like an unwelcome reminder of what today was supposed to be. In my head, I could still see the faces in the hotel drive. Paige's eyes wide, the murmurs of strangers, the way Mark's best man looked anywhere but at me. Somewhere out front, I imagined Susan Evans hearing the news from a guest's phone. I could see her pressing a manicured hand to her mouth, eyes narrowing in that way she had when something reflected badly on the family. Greg would stand behind her, silent, weighing the situation like a problem at work that needed an efficient solution. Neither of them would be thinking about how I felt. They would be calculating fallout. I leaned back against the cold wall, forcing my breathing to even out. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, a sound that reminded me of my bedroom as a kid lying awake while voices carried down the hallway from the living room. My parents always spoke softer when they talked about me, like they were discussing something fragile or defective. Vanessa was the opposite. She was the kind of child people noticed immediately. Dark hair always brushed, smile practiced just enough to look natural, the star in every school program. Margaret and Thomas treated her like a trophy they kept on display. When she brought home a clay bowl from art class, it went on the mantel. When I spent days painting something for the school fair, it disappeared into a drawer in the kitchen. I remembered my 9th birthday. Vanessa had a soccer game that morning, so my party was moved to the afternoon. By the time we got home, half the guests had gone. My cake sat on the counter, candles half melted from being lit and relit. Margaret said maybe next year we would do something bigger. Next year came, and Vanessa's recital fell on the same weekend. It wasn't that they were cruel in the obvious ways, it was that they seemed to see me only in the spaces between moments that mattered to them. I learned to keep my head down, to do well in school without making noise about it. Straight as part-time job in high school, college acceptance. Each time I waited for that flicker of pride. Each time it never came. Oliver came into my life when I was 16. Vanessa had begged for a dog at 14, promising charts and walks and responsibility. 3 weeks later, she was tired of him, complaining about the smell, the noise, the scratches on the floor. My parents talked about finding him a new home, even putting him down if no one wanted him. I told them I would take care of him every walk, every meal. They said fine, but he was my responsibility. He became more than that. He was the only one in the house who seemed happy when I walked into a room. Now, sitting in that cold room, I thought about him pacing in Paige's hotel room, probably waiting for me. The idea that he might end up in some shelter because of whatever this was made my chest tighten more than the thought of the cuffs. The door opened and an officer I had not seen before stepped in. She asked if I needed water. I shook my head. She told me someone would be in to speak with me shortly and left without waiting for a response. Her shoes clicked down the hallway until I could not hear them anymore. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to piece together how we had gotten here. This morning I was fastening my grandmother's bracelet. Now I was sitting in a holding cell in a wedding gown that felt heavier with every breath. My mind kept circling back to Vanessa's face in the hotel drive, the way she watched me like she was waiting for a line to be delivered. I didn't know what the next hour would bring or who they would send in to talk to me, but I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened, I could not count on my family to tell the truth for me. That had been true for a long time. Only now it was playing out in front of an audience I could not escape. I shifted on the bench, the satin rustling in the quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang sharp and sudden, then stopped. I focused on that silence, willing it to stretch, because it was easier than thinking about the mess waiting just outside this room. Walter's face came to mind the way it always did when I felt cornered, calm and steady like the front porch of his house on a summer evening. My grandfather had a way of making you believe there was a way through even if you could not see it yet. He was 82 now, retired from teaching high school history, but sharper than anyone else in the family. He was also the only one who had never made me feel like I had to earn my place at the table. When I was a kid, his place in Beaufort was the only spot that felt safe. I could walk there from our house in about 20 minutes, cut through the park, and he would be waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea. He never asked why I came. He just let me sit there and talk or not talk at all. He would tell me about his students, about history, about the stubborn little garden he kept even when the heat tried to kill it. Walter always told me that independence was worth more than approval. I did not fully understand it when I was younger, but over the years it became the only advice that stuck. He hinted more than once that he would help me when I got married. I thought he meant a check or a gift to help us start out. I never pressed him for details. In 2014, Vanessa had been in her sophomore year at a state university. She came home for winter break and never went back. She said college was toxic, that professors were out to get her, that she did not see the point of wasting time when she could make money faster elsewhere. What she actually did was sleep late, pick up a couple of shifts at a boutique, and spend the rest of her time with people who always seemed to be on the edge of trouble. Walter asked me quietly if I thought she was using anything. I told him I didn't know. Back then, she barely spoke to me unless she wanted something. It stayed that way until Mark proposed in the fall of 2022. We had been dating for 3 years, steady and quiet. He asked me in the little courtyard behind my apartment building, just the 2 of us, and I said yes without a single doubt. A week later, Vanessa started showing up more. She asked about the ring, about where we would live, about the guest list. Somehow she found out about Walter's plans. I never told her. My mother must have said something in passing, or maybe she overheard. The story that went around was that Walter intended to give me a sizable gift for the wedding, enough to put a down payment on a house. The amount shifted depending on who was telling it, but by the time it got back to me, Vanessa had heard the number was in the hundreds of thousands. Her attitude toward the wedding shifted almost overnight. She offered to help with planning, which meant criticizing my choices in flowers and venue. She volunteered to handle music, then complained when I told her we had already booked a band. She asked over and over who would be my maid of honor. When I told her it would be Paige, she smiled tight and said Paige was fine for casual events, but maybe not the image I wanted for something this big. Paige had been my best friend since high school. She knew me better than anyone, and she was the only person besides Walter who had consistently shown up when it mattered. Choosing her was never a question. Vanessa did not take the answer well. She started making little comments in front of our mother about how family should come first, how it was embarrassing not to have my own sister stand beside me. Margaret never openly took sides, but she always found a way to end those conversations with me, feeling like I had been the one in the wrong. I tried to push past it. I focused on fittings, on work, on the idea that in a few months I would be walking down the aisle towards someone who actually chose me. But there were moments that stayed in the back of my mind. Like the time I walked into the kitchen and Vanessa was sitting with our mother, their voices low, stopping abruptly when I entered. Or the day she came to my apartment unannounced and seemed oddly interested in where I kept things, asking casual questions about my schedule, about when I was usually home. Walter noticed something too. In early March, he pulled me aside after Sunday lunch at his house and asked if Vanessa had been acting different. I told him about the comments, the way she hovered around the wedding plans. He just nodded, his mouth pressed into a thin line. He said to keep my eyes open. Now sitting in the holding room with the taste of metal still faint on my wrists, I thought about that conversation. I wondered if he had guessed more than he said. Walter was not one to speak without purpose. If he had suspected Vanessa might try something, why hadn't he warned me directly? Maybe he thought I would not believe him. Or maybe he believed she would not go this far. The door at the far end of the hallway opened and I heard footsteps approaching. I straightened on the bench, the skirt settling around me. For a moment, I let myself imagine it was Walter walking toward me, ready to tell me that this was a mistake that could be fixed. But the steps were quicker, lighter, and they stopped just outside the room. The lock turned and I braced myself for whoever was on the other side. The door swung open and Mark stepped, and his expression caught somewhere between relief and dread. He looked like he had been pulled in every direction at once. His suit rumpled, his tie hanging loose, a faint redness around his eyes as if he had been rubbing them too hard. He stood there for a few seconds, gripping the doorframe like he needed to steady himself before coming any closer. When he finally crossed the room, I noticed the way his gaze kept darting around as if expecting someone else to be here. He sat across from me at the cold metal table but leaned back in the chair like he wanted the distance. I waited, not trusting my voice to be the first sound between us. He cleared his throat. "They gave me 10 minutes. His voice was quieter than I remembered, not the steady tone I heard when we talked about bills or weekend plans. I nodded and asked if he had spoken to anyone yet. He told me Susan had been on the phone since it happened, fielding calls from reporters who somehow already knew the story. Greg was furious not just at what happened but at how quickly it had gone public. He said their phones hadn't stopped ringing. I pictured them in their kitchen, Susan pacing with a cordless phone in hand, Greg standing by the counter with that pinched look that made him seem both stern and withdrawn. I asked what Susan thought. His jaw tightened a little. "She's worried about how this looks. For the family. For Dad's work. She thinks postponing the wedding is the smart move until..." He trailed off. "Until what?" I asked. "Until this all goes away," he said. Postponing. The word landed like a cold stone. I could see it in his face. Susan didn't mean delay, she meant remove. I tried to read his eyes to find the part of him that would push back against her, but what I found instead was hesitation. "Do you believe me?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes shifted and I saw the brief pause before he said, "Of course I do." But the pause told me more than the words. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, lowering his voice. "Greg's been talking to an old friend who used to be a criminal defense attorney. Just to understand what we're looking at. He says charges like this, if they stick..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I told him I wanted to talk to Paige. He said she had Oliver, she was keeping him safe. My chest eased a fraction at that. Then he glanced toward the guard in the corner, as if to remind me we weren't alone. "We shouldn't talk about specifics here," he said. "Not until we know who's listening." It hit me then, he was already managing me the way he managed clients at work, keeping things controlled, palatable. Not like a partner, but like a liability. I asked how he found out. He said he was standing in the lobby of the hotel, shaking hands with his uncle when he heard someone shout. By the time he got outside, the police had me in cuffs. Guests were watching from the doorway, phones in their hands. His voice dropped lower when he added Susan was talking to a detective before he even reached me. I felt the blood drain from my face. "She what?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "She told them she had no idea what was going on, but that she thought it was best to cooperate." We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the air vent filling the space between us. I wanted to tell him about Vanessa, about the years of small betrayals, about Walter's warnings, but the clock on the wall told me we had minutes, and I could already see the weight on his shoulders pressing him down. He reached for my hand across the table. His palm was warm, but his grip wasn't the same. It lacked that quiet assurance I'd always leaned on. "I'm doing everything I can," he said. "Just hang in there." Before I could respond, the guard announced time. Mark stood lingering for a moment as if he might bend down and kiss my cheek, but he didn't. He gave a faint nod and left, the door closing behind him with a heavy click. I stared at the empty space he'd left, the table still holding the shape of his hands in my memory. Somewhere deep in my chest, a new thought took root, one I didn't want to name yet. I was starting to wonder if, when it came to surviving this, I might be on my own. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence press in. Outside the small window, the light had shifted, the sharp brightness of morning softening into the muted haze of afternoon. I didn't know how many hours had passed since the knock on my hotel door, only that each one seemed to pull me further from the life I thought I was walking into and deeper into a place I didn't recognize. The guard called my name and I stood. My legs felt unsteady, like they weren't sure which direction to carry me next. But I knew one thing: I couldn't sit still and hope for someone else to fight this for me. If I wanted the truth to matter, I would have to make it matter myself. A woman in a navy suit was waiting for me in a small interview room, her briefcase on the table and a pen poised between her fingers. She looked barely older than me, her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, glasses slipping slightly down her nose as she stood to shake my hand. "Emily Ross," she said, sliding into her chair with an energy that felt both eager and uncertain. She started by telling me she had spoken with my family. The words landed heavy before she even explained what that meant. According to her, they believed this was an unfortunate misunderstanding, something that could be resolved quietly if I cooperated. The way she said it made it sound like a reasonable path, but her tone carried the same kind of rehearsed calm I had heard from people trying to steer me towards something they wanted. I asked her to clarify what cooperation looked like. She tapped her pen against a legal pad, avoiding my eyes for a beat too long. It would mean answering questions without pushing back, allowing the investigation to proceed without challenging the process, and not involving outside parties who might escalate things. She leaned in as if sharing a secret. "This doesn't have to get bigger than it already is," she said. I kept my hands folded on the table, watching her. She was young, probably fresh out of law school, maybe with a few minor cases under her belt. There was no sharp edge in her voice, none of the protective steel I had hoped for. She spoke like someone trying not to upset the balance, not like someone ready to take apart the lies that had put me here. "So my family told you this was an accident," I said slowly. She nodded, adding that they seemed genuinely concerned for me and for what this might do to my reputation. My jaw tightened. Concern for my reputation had never been something they invested in before. She shifted in her seat and said the police report noted the drugs had been found in 2 places and that this would make it difficult to argue it was a complete fabrication. I stared at her, wondering if she even considered that both discoveries could have been staged. When I didn't answer, she started talking about plea options, about ways to minimize the fallout. Her voice had that careful cadence of someone trying to make a bitter pill sound like a sensible choice. I let her speak, offering nothing in return. Every instinct told me that showing my hand now would only give her more to feed back to them. When the meeting ended, she gathered her papers quickly, promising to return with updates once she had spoken further with the detectives. She smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes and left without asking me a single real question about my side of the story. The guard reappeared to escort me back, and I walked in silence, my mind spinning. If Emily was my lifeline, I was in trouble. Her loyalty felt split before we had even begun, and I had no idea how much she had already given away. Back in the holding area, I sat on the bench and tried to steady my breathing. I thought about the hotel room that morning, the rows of dresses hung along the wall, the vanity crowded with brushes and lipstick. I remembered Vanessa drifting in and out, her eyes sliding over everything I had laid out. And then, in a flash, I remembered the bear. The small tan teddy bear with a stitched smile and a tiny bow around its neck, sitting quietly on the corner of the dresser. Paige had brought it to the bridal suite the night before, saying it was a good luck charm. She had set it so it faced the wardrobe where my gown hung, its shiny button eyes reflecting the soft light. Inside that bear was a camera. Paige had told me once, half joking, that it could catch anyone trying to steal her makeup at photo shoots. If it had been recording that morning, it might have seen everything. It might have caught who came into the room, who touched my dress, who slipped something into the folds of satin. The thought lit a spark inside me, the first flicker of control I had felt since the handcuffs closed. The problem was the bear was still in the suite. I imagined Vanessa or my mother tossing it in a bag, not knowing what it held. Paige might still be at the hotel packing up her gear. She was the only person I could trust to get to it before anyone else. I turned the idea over in my head, calculating the risk of making that call from here. If Emily was already aligned with my family, she might block me. If the police caught wind of me trying to retrieve evidence on my own, they could twist it into something else. But the bear wasn't going to wait for me to figure out the perfect move. I sat up straighter, the murmur of voices from the hallway growing louder as the afternoon shift began. I could almost feel the clock ticking above me. Somewhere out there was proof, and if I didn't act fast, it would be gone. The guard called me to the desk and told me I had one phone call. My hands felt cold as I picked up the receiver, the coiled cord twisting between my fingers. I punched in Paige's number from memory and prayed she would answer. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight and cautious. "Lauren, where are you? What's going on?" I cut her off. "I need you to listen, and I need you to do exactly what I say. Take Oliver and bring him to Walter's house right now. Do not stop anywhere and do not tell anyone you're going." She hesitated. "Okay, but what happened? Why are people saying?" I said it again, sharper this time. "Don't ask, just do it. Then you have to go back to the hotel, to the bridal suite. There's a teddy bear on the dresser. It's light brown with a ribbon around its neck. You need to get it before anyone else does. Put it in your camera bag and keep it with you." There was a pause on the other end, the kind where you can feel someone deciding whether to trust you. Paige finally said, "I'll get it." "But how am I supposed to get into the room if they've already checked out or locked it?" "Figure it out," I said quietly. "Tell them you left a lens in there. Tell them you're finishing a shoot for me. Whatever you do, make sure no one from my family sees you." She promised she would move fast. Her voice had shifted, the hesitation replaced by that brisk, focused tone she used when she was on assignment. "I'll call you when I have it," she said, and then the line went dead. The guard motioned me back to the bench. I sat, the receiver's cold plastic still ghosting my palm, and tried to picture Paige weaving through the hotel, Oliver's leash in one hand, camera bag slung over her shoulder. If anyone could pull it off, it was her. A low hum of conversation drifted from the front desk, and I caught fragments of words. Wedding, arrest, drugs. The way they said them in that casual, half-interested tone told me it was already more than just an incident report. People were talking. An officer walked past holding his phone, the screen lit up with a local news feed. I didn't mean to look, but the image was impossible to miss. It was me standing beside the open door of the white town car, wrists cuffed in front of me, my dress pooling awkwardly around my shoes. The headline scrolled underneath: Charleston bride arrested moments before ceremony. My stomach turned. If it had reached the news already, then the photo was probably being shared everywhere. I thought of guests from the wedding snapping pictures with their phones, texting them to friends, posting them with little captions they thought were clever. The door buzzed, and an officer stepped in holding a printout. He handed it to the guard and left. The guard glanced at it, then tacked it to a corkboard behind the desk. Even from across the room, I could make out my own name and the charge. It was official now, in black and white, pinned up like a piece of routine paperwork. I shifted on the bench, feeling the layers of satin press against me. Every part of me wanted to peel it off, to shed the dress that had turned into a costume for a scandal. But I kept it on, a stubborn reminder to myself of what this day was supposed to have been. Somewhere out there, Paige was moving through crowds, dodging questions and slipping keys into locks she wasn't supposed to have. I imagined her reaching for the bear, tucking it into her bag without a second glance, and walking away as if nothing had happened. I needed that image to stay intact, because without it, all I had left was the weight of those photos and the way the world was already reshaping me into someone I wasn't. An officer called my name, breaking into my thoughts. I stood slowly, bracing for whatever came next, but kept my eyes steady. I couldn't control the headlines or the whispers or the way my own family had turned into a wall between me and the truth. But I could still place my trust in the one person who had never treated me like a problem to be solved. And right now, that had to be enough. The room they led me into was smaller than the last, with one wall of frosted glass that let in a muted wash of daylight. A metal table sat in the center with two chairs facing each other. I was still standing when the door opened again, and a man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, his movements deliberate, the kind of slow confidence that made the air feel heavier. He set a leather briefcase down on the table before even looking at me. When his eyes met mine, they held steady for just a beat before he spoke. "I'm Daniel Carter. Walter sent me." Hearing my grandfather's name hit me like a steadying hand on my shoulder. I sat down slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the table. Daniel took the other chair, leaning forward slightly, his voice low but clear. "I have a general idea of what's happened so far, but I need you to listen carefully. We don't have the luxury of time, and without hard proof, the case against you could stick." The words landed like cold water. I wanted to tell him everything at once, but he raised a hand. Start with this. Do you know of anything at all that could show who put those drugs in your dress or in the car? I hesitated, the image of the teddy bear flashing in my mind, the one I had tucked in the corner of the bridal suite that morning. Yes, there's a hidden camera inside a teddy bear. It was pointed straight at my dress and the table with my things. Daniel's expression sharpened in a way that told me he knew exactly how valuable that could be. Where is it now? I told him about my call to Paige, how I had asked her to take Oliver to Walter's and grab the bear from the bridal suite without drawing attention. Before I could finish, the door swung open again, and Paige stepped inside, her camera bag strapped across her chest like armor. She looked both winded and defiant. Got it, she said, simply pulling the teddy bear from the bag and placing it on the table. And I should tell you, I saw Vanessa this morning near the parking lot. She was moving around the car like she was looking for something, kept glancing over her shoulder. Daniel was already unzipping the seam in the bear, his fingers deftly pulling out a tiny memory card sealed in a plastic sleeve. He slipped it into a small protective case from his briefcase. This goes straight to my tech guy, he said. He's off the books fast and thorough. If there's anything on here, we'll have it by tonight. Paige's eyes flicked to me, searching for a sign that this was the right move. I gave her a faint nod, the kind you give when words would only get in the way. Daniel turned to her. Did anyone see you take it? No, Paige said, shaking her head. I waited until the hallway was empty. I think the hotel staff were busy dealing with the commotion outside. Good, keep it that way. His voice carried no warmth, but it wasn't unkind, it was focused, razor-edged. Paige gave my hand a squeeze before leaving, and the door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, the room felt still, like the noise of the station had been muted. Daniel tucked the memory card case into his inside pocket and stood. I'm heading straight to my tech. I'll call Walter with updates, but for now I need you to say nothing about this to anyone, not the police, not your fiancé, not your family. That last part caught in my chest. Not even Mark, especially not Mark. Right now we need to control the flow of information. The more people know, the more chances there are for it to get twisted. I nodded slowly. Understood. He gave me a short nod in return, then left with the same deliberate stride he'd entered with. I sat there for a few seconds after the door closed, my eyes fixed on the spot where the bear had been, picturing that tiny card making its way to someone who could finally expose the truth. I imagined Vanessa's face on that footage, the flick of her hair when she thought no one was watching, the quick dart of her eyes, her hand sliding something under the cushion of the car seat. I wanted that image burned into a screen so clear that no one, not even my mother, could deny what she'd done. When an officer came to escort me back, I felt the faintest shift in my own steps. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was something steadier than fear. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time since the police had shown up at the hotel, I believed it was a fight I could win. The guard unlocked the door again and stepped aside to let a tall man in a dark navy suit enter. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly why he was here. A slim leather briefcase hung from his hand, and his eyes scanned the room in a single sweep before settling on me. Lauren Mitchell. His voice was low, steady. My name is Daniel Carter. Your grandfather Walter sent me. Hearing Walter's name hit me harder than I expected, a small rush of relief pushing through the fog that had wrapped around me since the arrest. Daniel set the briefcase down on the table and pulled out the chair across from me. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table, as if closing the distance would make his words sharper. I've been told some of what happened, but I need you to hear me clearly. Without hard evidence, this case could get ugly for you very fast. There was no sugarcoating in his tone, no polite evasions, just fact. I swallowed, my throat dry. I know, good, now tell me this. Is there anything that could prove someone else put those drugs in your car or your dress? I hesitated for only a second before the memory surfaced. Yes. There's a teddy bear in the bridal suite. It has a hidden camera inside it. I left it facing my dress and the vanity table. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. And where is it now? I called my friend Paige earlier. She's getting it for me. She was in the hotel this morning. She might have already left with it. As if summoned, the door opened behind him. Paige stepped in her camera bag over one shoulder, eyes darting between me and Daniel. In her hands was the bear. "I got it," she said quietly, setting it on the table. "And you should know. I saw Vanessa near your car this morning. She was acting strange. Kept looking around like she didn't want to be seen." Daniel unzipped a hidden seam in the bear's back and pulled out the memory card, holding it up to the light. He didn't bother hiding the urgency in his movements. "I'll get this to my tech immediately. If there's anything here, we'll know soon." Paige's gaze softened as she looked at me. "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "But this helps." Daniel glanced at her. "Did anyone see you take it?" "Number." I waited until the hallway was empty. "Good. That might matter later." He slipped the card into a small hard case from his briefcase. "My technician works fast and discreetly. We'll have the footage before your arraignment." Paige gave my hand a firm squeeze before leaving her warmth lingering for a moment after the door shut. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me. I read between the lines of the reports. "Your family isn't exactly in your corner. That's putting it lightly. Then you understand why I'm telling you this. Do not discuss any of this with them. Not your sister, not your mother, not even your fiancé until we know what we're holding." "Mark?" I asked, my voice catching on the name. "Especially Mark. If he doubts you already, this will give him room to decide where he stands. Let him show you before you hand him anything." It was harsh but not wrong. I nodded slowly. Daniel stood, fastening his briefcase. The faint scent of clean cologne lingered in the space between us. "I'll be in touch soon. Try to get some rest." Rest. As if that was possible with my wedding dress still clinging to me like a joke no one else found funny. When he was gone, I sat in the silence, staring at the bear now lying limp on the table. That stuffed toy had been a bit of quiet insurance, something I had placed there out of habit from years of not trusting the people around me. I never thought it would become the one thing standing between me and a felony charge. I imagined Vanessa's face when she saw it, the tightening of her jaw when she realized I might have proof. That image steadied me more than any comforting words could. An officer passed by the open doorway, glancing in before moving on. Somewhere across town, in a small dark room, a technician would be loading that card into a computer. Somewhere my truth was waiting to be played back frame by frame. And when it did, I wanted every second to burn. Daniel returned the next afternoon, his briefcase looking heavier than before, though it was probably just my anticipation weighing it down in my mind. He motioned for the officer to close the door behind him, then set a slim black laptop on the table between us. His expression was focused, controlled, but there was a flicker in his eyes that told me this was not going to be bad news. "I think you're going to want to see this," he said, quietly tapping the spacebar. The screen came to life with a still frame of my bridal suite. The soft gold light from the window washed over the vanity, my dress hanging to the side like it was waiting for a moment that never came. In the corner of the frame, the teddy bear sat exactly where I'd left it. Daniel clicked play. The door opened. Vanessa stepped in, glancing behind her before shutting it. She wasn't dressed for the wedding yet, still in jeans and a loose top, her hair pulled back. She walked straight to my dress, her movements quick and deliberate. My stomach tightened as she lifted the layers of fabric, pulling something small and dark from her pocket. She slipped it deep into the lining, smoothing the skirt after like she had just fixed a wrinkle. I heard my own breath in the room, though it was just a recording. She moved to the vanity, opened the drawer where I had left my clutch, and looked inside. Whatever she saw didn't interest her. She left the drawer slightly open, crossed the room, and picked up the bear. For a moment I thought she had realized what it was, but then she set it back down, facing the same way. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her not knowing she was practically posing for the camera. Daniel paused the video, glancing at me. "There's more." The next clip was darker, from a different angle, the grainy footage marked with the hotel's parking lot timestamp. The image sharpened as Vanessa walked into frame, now in her bridesmaid dress, her hair done. She scanned the lot, then approached the white sedan with the flowers tied to the door handles. "My sedan." She pulled the passenger door open, crouched, and slid another bag under the seat. The whole motion took less than 5 seconds. The footage froze on her face as she straightened her eyes, darting to the left as if checking for witnesses. "That's her," I whispered, my voice thin. "The timestamp matches the window between when you left the suite and when the police arrived," Daniel said. "And the hotel security confirmed she was the only person near the car in that time frame." I sat back, letting the images sink into me like cold water. The mix of shock and relief was almost dizzying. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. This was fact preserved in pixels and numbers that no one could twist. Daniel closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "We'll have the full chain of custody from the hotel by tomorrow morning. I'm filing motions to include this in discovery and to request immediate dismissal." My hands were trembling under the table, but I pressed them together until they stilled. "Thank you, doesn't seem enough." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. The prosecution will try to argue the footage was tampered with or that there's an alternative explanation. But this," he tapped the laptop, "this is the kind of thing that turns cases." I thought of Vanessa's voice in the hallway earlier that morning, the edge in her laugh, the way she had looked at me as if she already knew how the day would end. I wondered what she had planned to say when the drugs were found. Would she have feigned concern, tried to look shocked, or simply stood back to watch Daniel slid the laptop into his briefcase? "I'll keep you updated. For now, sit tight. The less you say to anyone, the better." When he left, the room seemed quieter than before, like the air itself was holding its breath. I leaned back against the cold metal chair, closing my eyes for just a moment. The images replayed themselves behind my eyelids, sharp as glass. For the first time since the handcuffs had clicked around my wrists, I felt something steady building in my chest. It wasn't joy. Not yet. It was something harder, anchored deeper. I opened my eyes, staring at the spot on the table where the bear had been earlier. Vanessa had touched it without knowing. She had walked straight into the trap I had set without even meaning to. And now she wasn't the one holding the story anymore. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and the sharp tang of printer toner. The long oak table divided us like a fault line, with Daniel, Walter, and me on one side and my parents and Vanessa on the other. Margaret's pearls rested high against her collarbone, her spine ramrod straight, as if posture alone could shield her from what was coming. Thomas sat beside her, his gaze fixed on a stack of legal pads, avoiding my eyes. Vanessa lounged in her chair, her arms crossed, her mouth curved in something between a smirk and a dare. Daniel slid his laptop to the center of the table and opened it without preamble. A click, a soft whir, and then the bridal suite filled the screen. I didn't look at the image this time. I kept my focus on their faces. Vanessa's smirk faltered the moment she appeared on the screen. She shifted, trying to appear casual, but her eyes darted once toward Margaret before snapping back to the video. Margaret's hand moved to the pearls, fingers tightening around them. Thomas's jaw clenched and a muscle jumped at his temple. The footage rolled on in silence except for the faint hum of the building's HVAC. Vanessa lifting the dress, slipping the bag inside, smoothing the fabric. The timestamp blinking in the corner, each number another nail in the coffin she had built for herself. The parking lot footage came next. Vanessa in her bridesmaid dress walking toward my car, crouching at the passenger side, sliding the second bag under the seat. Daniel paused the video and let the still frame hang in the air. Margaret's voice was low, almost hoarse. "Vanessa, what is this?" Vanessa gave a small, tight laugh. "It's not what it looks like." Thomas finally looked up. "Then explain it." Her eyes flicked between them, then to me, and something in her expression shifted, hardened. "I wasn't going to let her run everything." She tilted her chin. "I wasn't planning for you to actually get arrested, Lauren. You were supposed to be stopped before it got that far. Just, Ed a little. You deserved that." Margaret sucked in a sharp breath. Vanessa Walter leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, voice calm but edged with steel. "You think framing your sister on her wedding day is just ing her?" Daniel's tone cut through the room. "What you've just admitted will be included in the record. This isn't just about planting illegal substances. This is obstruction of justice, false reporting, and perjury if you repeat any of your lies under oath." Vanessa's face drained of color, but she sat back folding her arms again like she could hide inside herself. Margaret's eyes shifted to me for the first time, but there was no apology there, only a quiet desperation. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. "We need to talk about this privately." Daniel didn't give them the chance. "There's no private left. This meeting was to give you the courtesy of seeing the evidence before it's in the prosecutor's hands. As of this afternoon, it will be. And I will also be requesting additional charges for your daughter's actions." The tension in the room felt like a storm pressing against the windows. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the air seemed reluctant to pass between us. Vanessa broke the silence with a scoff, but it was thinner now, her voice catching at the edges. "This is ridiculous." Daniel shut the laptop, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. "What's ridiculous is thinking you could get away with it." Walter's gaze moved from Vanessa to my parents. "You raised 2 daughters. Only one of them has any sense of decency. And from the way you're sitting here, I'm not sure you even know which one that is." Margaret's face went pale. Thomas didn't meet his eyes. I sat still, my pulse slowing into something steady and cold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being cornered. When Daniel gathered his files, the scrape of paper and zipper teeth was the only sound. He stood nodding toward the door. Walter followed. I rose last, letting the silence do what my words no longer needed to. No one tried to stop us as we left. The cold air outside the courthouse cleared my head just enough to register the cluster of cameras on the steps and the way lenses tilted toward us, as if drawn by gravity. Daniel kept a steady pace to the curb and told me to keep my eyes forward. Walter walked on my other side, his hand a quiet anchor at my elbow. Reporters called my name, tossed questions that blended into one long sound. We reached the car without answering a single one. By evening, the story had spread across local news sites and then to the regional stations. Every headline seemed to use the same still frame from the parking lot video: Vanessa's hand halfway under the passenger seat, the timestamp hanging in the corner like a verdict. My phone lit with messages from numbers I barely recognized: college friends, former clients, people who had not checked on me in years but suddenly had something to say. I turned it face down and let it buzz until the battery surrendered. The next morning, Daniel asked me to meet him at his office. His assistant had a stack of calls on a legal pad and a look that said she had been triaging chaos since dawn. I was settling into a chair across from his desk when the door swung open and Susan stepped in without waiting to be announced. She wore a fitted navy coat and a silk scarf, pearls at her throat, everything about her crisp and controlled. She did not sit. She said she wanted the real reason. Not the legal language, not polite summaries, but the truth about why my sister would do something like this. Her eyes were sharp and suspicious, as if the answer she expected would confirm her worst instincts about me. I told her to take a seat, and when she did not move, I stayed standing too. I told her it was not one act pulled out of nowhere. It was years of looking the other way while Vanessa floated above consequences. It was a house where attention was currency, and I never had enough to buy in. I said Vanessa heard rumors that Walter planned a wedding gift, and that she had always wanted control more than anything else. Control of the narrative, control of how people saw us, control of who got to win. Susan asked if this was only about money. Her voice carried the kind of disbelief that sounds like judgment dressed as curiosity. I told her money was a part of it, but not the center. I said Vanessa decided long ago that I should not have more than she did, not praise, not peace, not a future that felt like mine. I told Susan that my sister enjoyed arranging scenes and standing just out of frame, then pretending to be the one holding it all together. She reminded me that the press was not kind to families with public problems. She said the company name had already been mentioned in 2 articles and that her husband had a board meeting the next day. I felt something hot rise in my chest and forced my voice to stay even. I told her that my life was not a line on a reputational balance sheet. That I understood she cared about fallout, but I would not minimize what had happened to me to make her more comfortable. For a flicker of a second, her expression changed, a small crack in the polished surface. She asked why I had not come to them before the wedding, if I thought Vanessa was a problem. I said because I had spent years being told I was overreacting, that I was dramatic for noticing what was right in front of me, and that I had learned to stop asking my family for protection they were never going to give. Daniel stepped in, then calm but direct. He told Susan the evidence spoke for itself. He said the prosecutor had the footage and the security affidavits, and that any additional conversation about motive would unfold in court. He suggested she prepare her family for more attention once filings became public. She lifted her chin and said she would speak to Greg. Then she smoothed the edge of her coat, nodded once like she was dismissing a contractor, and left. That night, Greg called my phone. His voice sounded older than I remembered. He said he was sorry for not trusting me sooner. He said he had watched the video 3 times and felt sick each time, and that he had told Susan they were not going to be part of any narrative that tried to soften what happened. He asked what I needed from them. I told him I needed space to finish this and I needed them to stop speaking to the press. He agreed without protest, and I believed him more than I expected to. Mark showed up the next afternoon. He looked like he had missed every hour of sleep available and had walked the length of the peninsula trying to figure out what to say. He stood just inside my door with his hands in his pockets and said he had been thinking about the ceremony, about the guests who had flown in, about deposits and dates and all the practical scaffolding that used to make me feel secure. He said we did not have to cancel, that we could postpone until the fall, that time might calm the noise. I asked him if time would change the way he had looked at me outside the hotel, the way he had looked past me to the officers as if they had the answers he needed. He said he had been scared. He said he was trying to protect everyone, me included. I told him that protecting me began with believing me without a timestamp on a screen. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he did believe me and that the space between knowing and acting had embarrassed him. He said he wanted to do better. I told him I wanted that too, but I needed to finish clearing my name before I stood in front of anyone to make promises about forever. He nodded and said he would wait. He kissed my forehead like he used to after late dinners, and for a second I let my eyes close. When I opened them, he was still there. I appreciated that small fact more than I let on. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and preparation. Daniel drafted motions and scheduled calls. He brought in a private investigator to gather sworn statements from hotel staff and to document the chain of custody for the footage. He requested the guest list from the venue and compiled a list of people who had seen me in the hours before the arrest. He said we were not only building a defense, we were building a story that made sense even to people who wanted not to see it. Social media spun at its usual speed. One account posted a clip of me being led to the car and called it a cautionary tale. Another account posted the parking lot still and captioned it with a cheer for karma. I stopped reading after that. Paige filtered everything through Daniel and kept the rest off my screen. She brought Oliver to Walter's on the weekends and sent me photos when he fell asleep with his nose tucked under his paw. Those pictures steadied me better than any headline could unsteady me. Susan asked to meet again a few days later, this time at a quiet cafe near the water. She arrived early and already had tea when I sat down. She did not apologize, not directly. She said fear made people foolish and that she had been raised to manage problems before they became news. She said this was the first time she had realized that managing a problem could mean erasing a person who was still in the room. I told her I was not going to be erased. She nodded and said she was beginning to understand that. She asked again about my parents. I told her Margaret had not called and Thomas had not either, and that I did not expect them to. I said Walter had asked me to move in with him for a while to get some quiet and some space. Susan asked if I would accept any help from them while I prepared for court. I said moral support would do more than money right now. She said she would try to give it. I said trying was better than pretending. Greg sent a message that evening to let me know he had spoken to the communications team at his company. They would issue no statements, and if reporters called the office, they would be told to call the courthouse for filings. He ended the message by saying their door was open if I needed dinner, and silence. I stared at those words for a long moment, surprised by how much they loosened something tight in my chest. Mark and I started talking in shorter, more honest sentences. He did not promise that he could fix anything. I did not pretend that postponing a ceremony would fix what had cracked. We talked about work and sleep and food and the way the city felt different when you were the subject of its conversations. He told me his mother had asked if he was sure. He told her yes. He told me he wanted to show that answer with time, not speeches. On a quiet afternoon, Walter called and asked if I could come by. He had made gumbo and insisted there was too much for one person. I drove to Beaufort with the windows cracked, the marsh air rinsing out the stale scent of newsprint that seemed to cling to everything. He met me on the porch with a smile that reached his eyes. We ate at the kitchen table and he told me stories about the first year he taught, about a student who had gone on to run a bakery, about the way the river always looked different at dusk. He did not ask about the case until I brought it up. When I did, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he had never doubted I would find a way to put the truth in the same room with the lies and let people decide what they wanted to be. Driving back to Charleston, the bridge lights wove a slow pattern in the rearview mirror. I felt tired to the bone, but it was the kind of tired that comes after work that matters. The kind you can sleep inside. When I got home, Daniel had emailed to say the prosecutor had acknowledged receipt of the footage and the supporting affidavits. He said a hearing date would be set soon to discuss motions and that he would prefer I keep my schedule clear. I replied that I would be there. He responded with a single line that said, "We stay patient and we stay precise." I stood by the window and watched the street settle into evening. Somewhere across town, Susan was likely rewriting the script she used when problems knocked on her door. Somewhere Mark was setting an alarm for a morning run he would probably skip. Somewhere Vanessa was sitting with a lawyer who could not promise her anything at all. The city's noise thinned to a hush. My phone buzzed once more. It was Paige with a picture of Oliver asleep on Walter's rug, one ear flipped inside out, the softest accusation that I should be resting too. I set the phone down and let the room go quiet, the kind of quiet that does not erase you but reminds you that you are still here. The morning of the trial began with a sky the color of whetstone. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Daniel and I arrived, a restless cluster of cameras, microphones, and people craning to see who would walk through the main doors. Walter was waiting inside, a steady presence in a gray suit, his hand warm over mine, as we made our way toward the courtroom. The air in the chamber felt heavy, full of low murmurs that fell away when the judge entered. Vanessa sat at the defense table between her attorney and a deputy, her hair pulled back, face pale but composed. Margaret and Thomas were a few feet away, avoiding my eyes, their posture stiff like they were bracing against a wind only they could feel. The prosecutor's opening was brief. The evidence was clear, the footage showed intent, access, and execution. There were timestamps, witness statements, and the physical evidence from the car. There was no room left for speculation. Vanessa's lawyer stood and conferred with her, and then she rose. Her voice shook on the first word but steadied as she entered her plea. Guilty to 2 felony counts, evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. The judge repeated each charge, and she answered yes, her hands gripping the table until her knuckles whitened. Margaret and Thomas followed. Their lawyer tried to frame their actions as misguided loyalty, an attempt to shield their younger daughter from scandal. But the obstruction charge stood, and the false statements to law enforcement were undeniable. When the judge asked for their pleas, they said guilty, their voices quiet enough that the clerk asked them to repeat themselves. Sentencing came after a short recess. Vanessa was given 3 years in state prison. Margaret and Thomas received 18 months in county jail, followed by 2 years probation. The judge's tone was measured, but there was no softness in the words. Actions had consequences no matter how neatly dressed they arrived in court. Outside, the press closed in as soon as they stepped through the doors. Flashes popped, voices rose, and someone in the crowd shouted Vanessa's name. Margaret tried to push past without speaking, but the crush of people slowed them and the sound of questions followed them down the steps. The video of that moment would run on every local station that night. Vanessa's face turned away. Margaret's jaw set, Thomas looking like he had aged 10 years in a day. By the afternoon, social media carried the images everywhere. Headlines paired their sentences with pictures from the wedding day, the contrast sharp and merciless. Comments poured in, some from people we knew, others from strangers who felt entitled to their opinion. Friends who had once filled our family's holiday tables went quiet. Neighbors closed their doors when they saw cameras parked on the street. Walter asked me to meet him at his attorney's office 2 days later. When I arrived, he was sitting at the head of a long polished table, a thick folder in front of him. He explained in his steady, matter-of-fact way that he had established a trust in my name valued at $2 million. His voice didn't rise or fall. It was simply a fact he was putting into the world. He said it would be managed so that no one could access it or use it as leverage, not now, not ever. I tried to find words to thank him, but he waved them off. He said it was not charity, it was protection. He said family was meant to be a place where you didn't have to defend your right to exist. If I hadn't been given that before, he intended to make sure I had it now. That night I sat in my apartment with the trust paperwork spread across the table. The weight of it was more than financial. It was the opposite of what I had grown up knowing. It was stability that did not ask for anything in return. It was the quiet knowledge that I could choose my own life without calculating who might try to take it away. Still, there was an ache under the relief. The sentences did not rewrite the years of silence, the birthdays and holidays where I learned to measure every word. They did not undo the way suspicion had felt from Mark or the cold distance from Susan before the evidence came out. Justice was a fact on paper, but it did not fill the empty spaces. When the news cycle began to shift, the reporters stopped camping outside the courthouse. The neighbors still watched from behind curtains, but no one approached me on the street anymore. I walked Oliver along the waterfront and let the salt air carry some of the heaviness out of my chest. Paige joined me one evening and we talked about nothing important. It felt like a small luxury. Walter called to check on me every morning. Sometimes he talked about the garden or a book he was reading. Sometimes he said nothing more than that he hoped I was eating well. He never mentioned the trust again, but I could hear it in the way he said goodbye, as if he was reminding me it was there. The day Vanessa was transferred to the correctional facility, I stayed home. I didn't watch the coverage, though I knew it was out there. The next week, Margaret and Thomas began their sentences. I saw one photograph online, the two of them walking through the Sally Port, and closed the tab before the page finished loading. Life moved forward in small, quiet increments. Daniel began wrapping up the final filings. Paige returned to work without feeling like she had to keep her phone in her hand every second. Mark sent me short, steady messages, nothing heavy, just proof of presence. I replied when I felt ready. One evening, I sat on the porch at Walter's with a blanket over my knees, Oliver asleep at my feet. The river was dark and still, the kind of quiet water that holds the reflection of every light. I thought about the courtroom, the verdicts, the trust, and the hollow places those things couldn't reach. Justice had come, and it mattered. But it wasn't the same as having back what had been taken. Walter stepped out with 2 mugs of tea and handed me one. He didn't ask what I was thinking. We sat in silence, the steam curling into the cool air, and for the first time in a long while I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anyone. The mornings by the river had a way of settling into me before I was even fully awake. Light would spill through the tall windows of Walter's kitchen, warming the hardwood under my feet, and Oliver would nudge at my leg until I poured his food. Walter liked the quiet early hours, the way the mist lifted off the water like it was giving the day permission to begin. I found myself liking it too. Moving in with him was not a decision I made lightly, but it made sense. His home was a place with no shadows waiting around corners. My room overlooked the river, and at night I could hear the low hum of the current, steady and certain. I unpacked slowly, folding my life into this space one drawer at a time. By the second week, I was back at my job at the event planning firm in Charleston. My boss Meredith met me at the door with a hug that was tighter than I expected. She told me my clients had been patient, that my team had covered every detail while I was gone. Stepping into the office felt like stepping onto solid ground again. I threw myself into the work, drafting timelines, smoothing over vendor issues, and seeing events through to their last champagne toast. In the evenings, I started something new. I had enrolled in a few evening classes at the local college focused on criminal justice and legal process. It felt strange at first walking into a classroom again, but the curiosity was there. I wanted to understand the system that had almost swallowed me to know how to stand beside someone else if it tried to do the same to them. Mark called, often his voice careful but warm. He asked about my day, about Oliver, about Walter's garden. We met for lunch once, sitting by the marina with paper baskets of fried shrimp and coleslaw. He said he still wanted to marry me, that he was willing to wait until I was ready. I told him I needed to stand on my own feet a little longer. He nodded, and we ate in comfortable quiet, the kind that meant there was still something worth keeping. Susan never came to the house, but she sent a letter. She wrote that she had been wrong to doubt me, that fear had made her hold on to the wrong things. I read it twice and set it in a drawer. Forgiveness was a long road, and I was not at the end of it yet. Greg called sometimes, and those conversations were easier. He asked about the river, about work, about whether Walter still played poker on Thursdays. Paige became a fixture at the house. She would stop by with takeout, kick off her shoes, and sprawl on the couch with Oliver's head in her lap. We talked about everything and nothing, about her job, about a new coffee shop opening downtown, about the ridiculous shows we used to watch in college. She never brought up the trial unless I did. That was her way of making sure I didn't have to live there any longer than I chose. As the months passed, the sharp edges of what had happened began to dull. They never disappeared, but they stopped cutting every time I brushed against them. The papers moved on to other stories, the kind that would burn bright for a week and fade. People in town stopped looking twice when they saw me in the grocery store. I learned the rhythm of life here, the way the river rose and fell with the tides, the way the porch caught the last light in the evenings. One Saturday morning I was in the kitchen making coffee when Walter came in holding the mail. He handed me a thick envelope with my name on it. Inside was the official notice that the trust had been fully executed, that every safeguard he had insisted on was in place. I traced the raised seal on the paper, feeling the weight of what it meant. It was not about the money. It was about knowing no one could take from me what I had built for myself. That afternoon I took Oliver for a long walk along the riverbank. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the sun turned the water into sheets of shifting light. I thought about the girl I had been before all this, the one who measured her worth by how little trouble she could cause, how much she could keep the peace. That girl had been gone for a long time now. When we reached the bend in the river, I sat on the old wooden bench and let Oliver chase the gulls for a while. I thought about the people who might be listening to this story someday. Maybe they would know what it felt like to be betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect them. Maybe they would understand the hollow space it leaves behind. If they did, I wanted them to hear this part most of all. You do not have to stay silent. You do not have to accept the version of you that someone else decided was true. Your worth is not theirs to define. The strength is in keeping your ground when the world tells you to move, and walking forward even when the past still pulls at your sleeve. By the time Oliver came trotting back, his tongue lolling and his paws wet from the edge of the water, the tide had begun to turn. We walked home slowly, the late afternoon light soft against the porch when we reached it. Walter was there, a book in his lap, and he looked up with that quiet nod of his. The river kept moving, and so did I. If my story stays with you, tell me in the comments what part you held on to. And if you have your own story of finding your strength after betrayal, I hope you share it, because someone out there might be waiting to hear they're not alone.